he sort of angered everyone, got everyone in a right tears, and then now everyone's having to sort of walk back on it all. Even Hegseth himself kind of rode back on it.
So the USA could still provide an air defence to a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, but only if they can broker a deal to access rare earth minerals. Scott Bessent, Trump's Treasury Secretary, said the USA could provide a security shield if they were able to strike such a deal and increase their economic collaboration. Let's speak to Larisa Brown, the Times defence editor, who's got the story. Morning, Larisa.
Good morning.
So just explain more about this. In reality, what would an air defence provided by the USA actually look like for Ukraine?
So everybody's obviously been discussing over the last 24 hours, what can we do if the US aren't willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, although actually it seems that there might have been some rowing back on that this morning. But the Brits are sort of interpreting comments made by the Treasury Secretary, where he talked about this shield, as the fact that the US might be willing to provide this air cover. And the Brits had been trying to persuade the Americans over the last few weeks to say that they would do that. And what it could look like, it could be Patriot air defence missile systems, or it could be something like aircraft. It's not quite clear yet. But of course, by having the potential system in place, it would mean that any European forces on the ground in Ukraine would be protected by the Americans. And for all of the Europeans that I've been speaking to, that's absolutely crucial for them, because they believe that there needs to be American security guarantees. There needs to be the US buy-in. Otherwise, Putin won't take any European force on the ground there seriously.
We know that Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is meeting the US Vice President JD Vance today at that Munich security conference. We also know that Donald Trump said early this morning that American, Russian and Ukrainian officials are going to meet at that conference to have conversations. Kyiv says talks weren't expected. They don't know anything about that. Russia hasn't commented. What are you reading into that? Is this Donald Trump just saying things as they come into his head, or is there a plan there? What are you hearing?
Well, we were hearing yesterday in Munich, there were a lot of whispers about a secret meeting between the Russians and the Americans. And actually, I was trying to get that stood up. So it was quite interesting when Trump then actually declared that was the case yesterday. And what's quite interesting in his comments is he kind of suggests that maybe Ukraine's a bit of an afterthought, like, oh yeah, we know the two big players are going to be in the room, but Ukraine can come if they want. I get the sense that the Ukrainians weren't really plugged into all of that. So it'll be really interesting to see how that develops today. What will that look like? What form will it take? Where will they meet? Will the Ukrainians, are they prepared to be in a room with the Russians? So obviously we've got a lot that's hanging on today. We've got a speech by Vance as well. But already we've kind of had a bit of mixed messages this morning, because a few days ago we had Hegseth ruling out putting American troops on the ground and ruling out Ukrainian accession to NATO. And then now we've had Vance do this interview on his way to Munich, saying that actually kind of everything's on the table. We could actually slap more economic sanctions on Russia, and we could deploy potentially troops if he doesn't agree to any peace deal. So it's all very unclear, and I think everyone going into the conference today is going to be, waiting very anxiously to see what happens next.
Do you get a sense that's a strategy to confuse and keep changing, or that it's just disorganisation?
It's hard to tell, but I feel like it's probably disorganisation. I feel like Hegseth, it was his first big foray onto the world stage, and I feel like he just sort of went a bit too far. He sort of angered everyone, got everyone in a right tears, and then now everyone's having to sort of walk back on it all. Even Hegseth himself kind of rode back on it yesterday at the defence ministerials in NATO. So yes, I kind of think they're just all a bit confused about what American policy is, and then they sort of thought, oh God, we've actually ruled out too much stuff. We need to put some more things back on the table so the Russians will actually make some concessions in all of this.
What do you make of the difference in tone between European leaders and the UK government. You know, we've heard things like, you know, European leaders saying that the US president is appeasing, it's appeasement. They're talking about allies walking into a deadly trap. Then on the other hand, we've got David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, who's going to the Munich Security Conference saying, look, everyone needs to calm down. We need to keep calm. Senior government source telling you we can't spin ourselves up like Europeans. They've got themselves in a flat spin. What do you read in the different approaches there?
Everything coming from the UK has been extremely measured compared to the Europeans. And I suppose the UK are trying to sort of find a middle ground in all of this. They're saying that actually nothing's been ruled out. Perhaps they're getting, you know, private briefings and messages from the Americans that actually all of these things could still be on the table. But, you know, Hegseth wanted to sort of take a tough stance in the open. But yes, you know, Healy said yesterday that, you know, it's too early to sort of say, you know, to get all angry, basically. But the Europeans really feel this is their moment to say something and to stand up to Trump, because obviously they're terrified about what could happen next if Ukraine falls to Russia, or there's too many concessions and Putin feels emboldened to take on the eastern flank of NATO.
It feels like there's kind of a change in the world order. You got Pete Hegseth basically saying Trump will decide who's sitting around that negotiating table. He's the leader of the free world. Are you getting a sense that the UK government is being kept informed of what's going on, even being consulted on it, or are they just sitting back and watching like everyone else?
I think before we heard from Trump a couple of days ago when he announced that he'd had that phone call with Putin, the British government had been told that something was coming from Trump, but not what it was. And so I suppose that kind of shows you exactly what's going on. It's like American officials are trying to get out a bit of information to their British counterparts. But actually, you know, the UK government is largely in the dark on all of this, as is, of course, the Europeans. And I think that's one of the problems is people don't feel like they're being part of this process, and they really feel that they need a seat at the table because this is about their future after all.
Larisa, it's always so good to get your insight. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.
As Larisa Brown there, the Times defence editor. Her story's on the front page of the paper today, written there along with Oliver Wright, policy editor. We'll speak to him later on. Also Bruno Waterfield in Brussels and Adrian Phillips in Kyiv. Really just kind of building a picture of what we're hearing, what's being said, what's going on behind the scenes. And indeed, it's going to be an interesting day ahead, isn't it, with all of those discussions at this Munich Security Conference.
I hope we're helping just to sort of piece together exactly what we're expecting today. And yes, there is uncertainty, as Larisa was just explaining, but it feels like this thing is moving and moving quickly. That Wall Street Journal interview with JD Vance saying the US would hit Moscow with sanctions and potentially military action if Vladimir Putin won't agree to a peace deal with Ukraine that guarantees long-term independence. This is America really playing both sides really very strongly. That's the thing, isn't it? That actually, as Larisa was saying there, that to some extent maybe they realise they put too much on the table. They're having to claw their way back a little at this point. This is diplomacy in the era of Trump. It feels remarkably different to anything that we've been used to in recent times.
It's deal-making. Is it diplomacy?
Well,
that's fair just point. Deal-making?
So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? How does he view the word diplomacy? Is it in his top 5 favourite words?
It's not the way that diplomacy has been done in the past.
No, it's unconventional. It's erratic. It's different. But is it working? That's the thing. And I can't escape this thought that no one was presenting a realistic plan for peace. So why throw stones at the guy who's suddenly offering to make it work? I can't get away from that.